We'll conclude our discussion of gross domestic product by reviewing some shortcomings of GDP. GDP is an excellent economic statistic that can tell us how much output is being made in order to satisfy wants. It can tell us which way the economy is going, is it getting stronger or weaker. So it is a very useful statistic, but it has some shortcomings that we'll review now. So first, it excludes non-market transactions. So homemakers, for example, since there's no dollar value attached to the work they're doing, it is excluded from GDP because GDP is the final market value. So they are producing something, but it escapes capture. A mechanic who works on his own car, her own car, will not be counted in GDP, even though it's something of value. Now, if the homemaker hired a maid to come in, or if the car mechanic took his car to the garage, then there would be a market value. It would be the very same job, but in one situation where they're doing it for themselves with no market value, it would be excluded. And where there is a market value, GDP will be included in GDP. Leisure. It's estimated that the work week has decreased in this country from 53 to 36 hours a week, and that enhances a standard of living because you have more leisure time, but there's no monetary value attached to that, and so the improvement in the quality of life given by less working hours is not measured in GDP. Improved product quality. TVs, cars, PCs, they've all improved in quality quite a bit in the recent past, yet some of these things are actually dropping in price while improving in quality, and that would serve to underestimate, GDP would underestimate our quality of living. The underground economy, it's estimated that 8% of economic activity is illegal, and naturally no one's going to report their illegal activity to the government, so it can be included in GDP. Al Capone, for example, he was, although he killed many people, he was not found guilty of murder or even bootlegging. He was found guilty of tax evasion by not reporting his income to the IRS. The environment. To the extent there is pollution, the harmful effects of that pollution is not included in GDP. So GDP is overstating how well we're doing because we would need to subtract out those harmful effects. Another criticism of GDP is the composition and distribution of output. Harmful products, dollar for dollar, are counted equally with helpful products. So a society that makes weapons to the tune of $100 GDP compared to a society that makes medicine to the tune of $100, those GDP, for example, would be counted equally. It doesn't, and the composition and distribution of output, GDP does not talk about how equitably the income is, the output is divided. So you'd have two countries with the very same GDP, and perhaps one with a very unfair distribution of output, and another one with a fair distribution of output, and GDP can't perceive that. Both will impact how happy societies. In fact, I believe it's the country of Nepal. They don't have GDP. They try to measure a happiness index, which is entertaining. Now GDP as distinct from per capita GDP. GDP is the total market value of output, and per capita is on average output per person. So you take GDP and divide it by the population, you get per capita output. And so one country may have a larger GDP than another, but if the other country with the smaller GDP has a smaller population, it may in fact have a higher GDP per capita. And that would indicate, if you're trying to use GDP as a measure of happiness based on output, you may be misled to think that the country with the highest GDP in total has a higher standard of living, but you would really want to look at that GDP per capita and adjust output for population. These are some shortcomings with GDP, and you can look at some examples and work through them on the next page.